Welcome to the first video that In the Know has done. It's going to be about a hot topic that is circulating the Pelicans Twitter sphere and Twitter sphere in general, and it's what to do with Deandre Ayton. There's a contingent of Pelicans fans who are very excited about the prospect of Ayton leaving Phoenix not wanting to pay him, and just sort of his timeline fit with the Pelicans young group. Mason and I are here to tell you, pump the brakes. Pump the brakes on Deandre Ayton. Mason, I want to kick it off with you. Just overall thoughts on Deandre Ayton, his sort of performance in the playoffs, and where you think you're at with regards to his contract and fit on the Pelicans.
Yeah, first of all, I think you created a word and we should use it frequently from now on. I think you combined circling and percolating, and we created something. But yeah, I mean, look, he's a great player, and Pelicans fans got a up close and personal view of that with Ayton in that series. I mean, you saw a little less consistency on that end from him in the second round, but really, I think it comes down to the fit for this Pelicans team, and really how do you really want to make that type of financial investment in a player like Ayton? I think there's a lot of things to consider when it comes to him, but where are you at?
So let's talk about the finances specifically.
Yep.
The biggest thing is he wants a max contract. He wanted the full 5-year deal from Phoenix, which is around 170, 180 million. That figure, which is going to be 25% of the salary cap with 8% raises if Phoenix gets to keep him. Is he a max contract player? Yes or no?
No. That doesn't mean he won't get it. I think to the right team in the right situation, there's an argument that I think is justifiable to pay him a max contract. I don't think New Orleans is that team for sure.
So let's talk about New Orleans. The max contract for him in New Orleans looks a little bit different than the Phoenix contract. New Orleans can offer him a max of 4 years and only 5% raises. The base salary is still like 30.5 million is the first year, and then I think the 4-year total comes out to about 131 million with the 5% raises. I believe, as is most restricted free agent cases, that final year often ends up being a player option, which is another difficult thing to deal with, and another thing that's incentivized the team not to match or just not want that contract is often there is a full 15% trade kicker that the team is going to be on the hook for if you end up trading that player. So generally, that's how these restricted free agent type of deals work. That's a lot of money to be adding to the Pelicans. Now let's talk about what the Pelicans cap sheet sort of looked like. For the next year, the Pelicans are effectively like $1 million to $2 million under the tax line. They are at 14 full roster spots. They have 2 players making over $30 million in CJ McCollum and Brandon Ingram. And while they have the necessary salary to add to a trade that would make, absorbing 30 million possible, one thing that people aren't considering is the future years when Zion's potential deal kicks in. Mason, do you think Gayle Benson is going to be a person willing to pay the tax for this team for multiple years?
I think that's a risky proposition to assume that. I think the repeater tax penalty here is a big deal. And so is Gayle Benson willing to pay the tax is a totally different conversation than is Gayle Benson willing to pay the tax in multiple years? And I think that's really tough. I mean, I certainly see them saying 23, 24 that year, like we want to make a push. And then depending on what happens in future years with the cap situation, with the TV deal, I think that's a very real thing that you have to consider. And maybe they can pay it 1 year and then duck it the next. But do you really want to start that game as early as the season after this coming one, or even this season? I don't think there's any chance in hell the Pelicans are paying the tax in 22-23. But if you do it in 23-24, then you're starting to have to play that tap dance around. Do you go duck in and out from year to year? And so it's a tough thing to figure out.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I think the situation that would allow them to pay the tax is if the Pelicans were contending immediately. I think if the Pelicans feel strongly about adding Ayton to this core with CJ, with a healthy Zion, and they think they can be a Phoenix Suns level team in the regular season and then a better team than they were in the postseason, that's not a question. Luxury tax is sort of the requirement if you want to be a contender, especially a long-term contender. You can look back at the history of the luxury tax since it was implemented all the way back to 2002, and there have only been a handful of teams who have not paid the luxury tax in the year that they have won the title, and all of those teams went on to pay the luxury tax either the year after or the second year after that, or in a different finals run. So that's going to be a requirement if the Pelicans are ever going to be serious about contending. I think there is a pretty big question about if Ayton is the guy that is going to catapult them into that sphere. And so let's talk about his on-court fit for a little bit. We've seen two teams, and John Hollinger just wrote a really good article on this, kind of get pushed out of the playoffs because of space ball. It's not small ball. It's not necessarily having smaller players on the court, but it's having players on the court who can shoot and allowing the stars a lot of space to just attack the rim, have one-on-one matchups, and play make off of that. The Boston Celtics just made it rain on the Bucks from three, and then obviously we saw Luka and the Mavs put a hurting on the Suns. In those situations, how valuable is a traditional big like DeAndre Ayton, who is extremely effective at what he does, but is perhaps stretched a little bit too thin when the floor is spaced?
Yeah, it's certainly challenging, and I think in the Pelicans context specifically, the Zion factor is really perplexing in the sense of he has his own gravity to him, right? But at the same time, if you're looking at kind of rounding out that team with DeAndre Ayton and then a guy like Herb Jones, who I think is, I don't see a scenario where the Pelicans are going to move him off the starting lineup given what he provides to this team. It's really irreplaceable, which is crazy to say as a second round draft pick rookie, but that's where we are. And so if you're looking at that team, is that really you've invested officially, you've invested in that team being your squad, especially with the Zion extension. If you're talking about Ayton, Ingram and McCollum, we can talk about what happens with CJ 2 years from now, but that's really that's it. And so, I mean, the team it should be good enough in a lot of areas, but I struggle to see that as the team that can really make the Pelicans a true contender. And so, if you're getting almost there, to your earlier point about the tax, I don't know if that's the roster that you really want to go all out with. And so, look, you've got a lot of good devil's advocate arguments out here about the Pelicans team. They haven't been good consistently. And so anything you can do to add talent to this roster, especially young talent, I get it. But I don't think this is the move at this point.
So let's talk about what needs to happen, what kind of scenarios need to be checked off in order for Ayton to be worth that max and to be worth that max specifically to the Pelicans. Is there an area on the court you can see him develop? And then is there something financially or a roster shakeup that needs to happen to accommodate that?
It's kind of both, I think. Unless you tell me Ayton can go shoot 40%, or not 40, but like if he can shoot well enough to like Brook Lopez style or a little better than Brook Lopez on that kind of volume and really become a threat from 3-point range, that's the kind of thing you need. And look, you saw in the New Orleans series, he can knock down a mid-range jumper. He's getting that skill. He's refining that skill and getting much better at it than he was when he entered the league. And so I think that that's what you have to rely on. And I don't know if I want to put all my eggs in that basket. And so if you're not confident about getting there, then yeah, you have to figure out some sort of roster shakeup. And there's not an easy answer if that's what you're trying to do. I mean, what do you think?
So I think your point about the shooting is absolutely correct. I think in order for Ayton to reach his full potential as a player, he does need to be given the green light to shoot from three. He has fantastic touch around the rim. It seemed like he never missed a mid-range jumper in the entire Pelican series. There's no reason to believe that cannot progress to the three-point line. And it may take a couple years, but that's what you're investing in, right? When you give a player a 4 or 5 year max, you're investing in growth over a time period, and that's what you're hoping he turns into. That changes the math for me. If he can become, I don't want to say a high percentage three-point shooter, I want to say a high volume three-point shooter. If he is willing to let it fly 4 to 5 to 6, 7 times a game, then that gives you so many different options on the floor offensively, and it takes him away from just being a very high-level rim roller and finisher. The question that I have regarding that is, I'm pretty confident that Monty does not want him to play that way. So it doesn't seem like he's going to reach that ceiling on the Suns. Is Willie Green going to enable him to play that way, given that he is from the Monty tree and he has seen Ayton? Does he share some of those same beliefs that Monty does? Or is Willie Green going to lean on his background from Golden State and realize, hey, three-point shooting is very important and we want our bigs to space out? Now, it looked like Jonas Valanciunas had the green light to shoot whenever he needed to. So I think there is a data point that's valuable here with regards to Ayton being given the green light. But again, I think when you have coaches who have like preset anchors on what a player is, it can be very difficult for them to overcome. And I think that's a challenge for them to face. The second thing is, if you are investing in Ayton long-term financially, then I don't think there is a viable path to keep CJ long-term. I think you let him play out his contract. You don't lock yourself into the extension. If you do, you're looking to move off of him, breaking him into the smaller salary spots, because the need for scoring, I think, goes down, and the need for other ancillary skills and defense goes up. And so, CJ is a very valuable piece of the Pelicans. I think that's going to be a question regardless of whether they trade for Ayton or not, just sort of that long-term future. We've seen Chris Paul age before our eyes. We've seen other guards who are past 30 kind of slow down, and you do wonder what that looks like with CJ, even though he is a player that primarily relies on skill and craft. That's something that the Pelicans have to be careful of moving forward. But the big thing that I want to talk about that I haven't seen anyone on Twitter talk about yet is the actual trade mechanic to trade for Deandre Ayton. The one thing that kicks our butt every single year when analyzing trades and sign-in trades specifically is the base year compensation rule. The base year compensation rule means that Deandre Ayton, even though his first year salary is going to be $30.5 million, is going to count for 15 or half of that going out, but the full amount coming in. Or I might have said it backwards, but either way, the salary matching becomes increasingly difficult. And we saw that with the Lonzo trade. We've seen that when the Pelicans were in talks to sign and trade Boogie. We've seen that in the Bogdanovich trade that got vetoed or canceled by the league that was tampered, where the Bucks had to trade Dante DiVincenzo and a couple other players to the Kings to match salary. And because they were a team over the cap, and the Pelicans are definitely a team over the cap, the trade matching mechanic becomes super difficult. They would have to loop probably a third team in, if not more. And I just don't think it's worth the trouble of figuring out the cap magic and paying that amount and foregoing the assets to get it done to put Deandre Ayton on this team, unless I was very, very sure I had something lined up. And the other caveat I'd put in there is, depending on how the draft lottery shakes out, if they end up in a position where they are drafting Ivy or Shaedon Sharpe, and they kind of have this young guard that's going to be a star or projected to be a star, obviously, you can't predict these things with draft pieces, but sort of that next guard up in their wings, then you can really look on to moving for CJ, and then I'd consider it. But the base year compensation is what makes this trade difficult for anybody, and it's gonna make it difficult for other teams as well. And I think a team that really can take advantage of this is a team with cap space like New York, because base year compensation doesn't impact, it doesn't come into play when you have cap space. Portland can create the cap space if necessary, if they renounce their free agents. I think Detroit has some cap space to play with. So those are the teams I'd be looking at more so than the Pelicans. But that is where I'm at with DeAndre Ayton. Is really good player. It requires a certain amount of things for it to go right for him to be worth the contract. But the contract itself is going to be a hassle to match.
Yeah, it's a lot of it's placing a heavy dollar bet on a player that is a questionable to good, not great fit, when there's a lot of things that still need to be ironed out for this team. And obviously, decisions will be made. We don't have to make this decision. The Pelicans don't have to make the decision until after the draft. So that's another. You mentioned that it's a hugely important piece, because how they want to build their team around Zion, around Brandon Ingram, is going to be impacted by what draft pick they get, what slot they're taking. So yeah, I think we generally agree on this. I think as far as the one thing I wanted to bring back up is your point about Willie Green and really the type of coach he is. And I think we saw I'm making up words now. We've seen both sides from him in the sense that he let Valanciunas fire away from three, but also we saw in the playoffs that Trey Murphy really had to work to get minutes, right? And so we saw it was very clear what he did for the spacing for this team. And so on the one hand, you think you believe in Willie Green and the coaching staff to understand the value of spacing, but sometimes rotations didn't really bear that out. And so it's a very intriguing question regarding what type of role he would want DeAndre Ayton to play on a team like this, but it's just not one that I think that is worth pursuing, given what it would cost, both asset-wise and dollar-wise, to make it happen.
So my final question before we thank our sponsors here. It's start of training camp and Deandre Ayton is on the roster. Your emotional feeling, your emotional state, status, where are you at?
I'm hyped because it's more talent through the door, and so I'm not. I don't want it. I guess I would be upset that about the process maybe, but I think making this team as good as you can, as fast as you can, as a fan, has to generate excitement, and so that's cool. But if the question is to what end?
I'm with you. Thanks, Mason. And just want to give a quick shout out to DraftKings, our sponsor. It is major time in Tulsa's second golf major this week. Now, new customers can place a $5 bet on who will win in any single round matchups and get $100 in free bets, win or lose. So don't miss out on all the action this week on DraftKings. Download the DraftKings app. Use the promo code BOOT as you see on this broadcast below. Bet $5, get $100 in free bets, no matter what. The promo code is BOOT, BOOT, and only at DraftKings Sportsbook. Do have to give a disclaimer that minimum age and eligibility restrictions apply. And if you or someone you know has a gambling problem, crisis counseling and referral services can be accessed by calling 1-800-GAMBLER. That's 1-800-426-2537. Appreciate y'all listening and stay tuned for our next stuff.